Sorry, just trying to fix the focus. Right after I hit go live, everything got totally out of focus. All right. What? An error occurred. Let's read. Oh, you can see me? Oh, well, if you can see me, that's awesome. Let me know if it's still working. Right now, the live preview is all messed up. So I'll just check it real quick and make sure that I can see me too. It looks like, okay, cool. Looks like I'm good. I don't know why the live stream UI was just showing an error saying that nothing was showing up. So I'm gonna make sure that it was all good. Anyway, I think we'll kick this off a few minutes early. If anybody's got questions that you wanted to ask, feel free to just drop them down below or drop them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them as quick as possible. I wanted to cover a couple questions that I had an email real quick. I'll try not to pull my pants down, James. Anyway, there are a couple things that I just wanted to answer that I got an email that are relatively common questions that I wanted to just address really quick. And one of them was about art. So there was a little bit of chat already about art in the channel. In fact, let me grab the YouTube channel over here so I can just see the chat and not my face on the screen. As soon as I figure out which tab it is. There it is. I'll pull that over here. Get a better view. Anyway, the question that about art that I get constantly is it's usually from new developers, and they're asking about wanting to start learning how to make games, and they're trying to learn how to code, they're learning how to do game design, and they're learning how to make art. They're trying to do all three at the same time, and tons and tons of people seem to try to do this. And I just kind of wanted to talk about how I wouldn't really recommend that path. If you're starting out, pick the one of those three things that you're really good at or that you really like. I would recommend picking the programming side if you have any programming knowledge or skill, because it's by far the easiest to get a job at, and you can build just about anything. Don't focus too much on trying to be good at art and code, though, because I see what I see a lot of people do is just struggle to start like making a game, and then they got no idea how to build the art, and then they try to make the art, and then they're back and forth, and they never actually make much progress. They're like constantly making their own little things, but never really getting very far because they can't spend too much time working on art or code. And they're really very, very different skills. Like you can be an amazing artist and a terrible coder. Most amazing coders are terrible, terrible artists. I've met a couple guys who were really good at both things, like Dave, okay, Steve. There are a couple guys I can think of who are really good at art and code. They generally tended to be artists first, and then they learned how to code and found out they were even better at code. But most programmers are terrible at art. And I wanted to show a real quick example of exactly that. So I got, I don't know if you can see in my background. Hopefully it shows up. I got these 4 little art pieces that were painted up. So I just want to go over who did each one of these. This one was done by my daughter. She's like 18, pretty good at art, you can tell. And that one was her boyfriend. This was my 11-year-old. And then this is my amazingly bad art. And no, there's no reason that there's a V there. I was just making lines, and I'm really bad at drawing. I had some cool idea, like maybe it was gonna look neat and be some cool squiggly stuff. It turned out, looking like a weird vendetta skull thingy that's terrible. But you can see like just the, I just want to show the quality difference. And this is, I've been doing art for obviously a lot longer. I just have zero skill at it. Really. I've been alive a lot longer than all three of them, but I cannot make art anywhere near that quality. But again, the code side is completely different. So if you're trying to figure out like, hey, should I learn how to do code? Should I learn how to make art? Like, pick one. Don't try to do both because it's going to be a bit of a disaster. Or I wouldn't say disaster. It's going to be a lot slower, at least trying to do both at the same time. So my dogs are going wild outside right now. Anyway, let's hit some questions in chat real quick if anybody's got anything. Somebody said they got 1 million questions. I have not tried Godot, Mike. I've read a bit about it. It seems like an interesting engine, but it's still super new. It's not something that's super mature and has been around and has support for all of the different things. It looks like it's getting better, and it looks like it does a lot of cool stuff. But I'm so into Unity that making the switch doesn't really make sense. But I have taken a quick peek at it, and I probably should dive in more. Thank you, Spyro, and hello in Poland, and hello to Japan. I would read your name, but I wish I could read Japanese. I actually want to learn another language soon. My buddy Chris learned Japanese and made it seem really interesting and not too difficult, so I feel like I should try something like that. Let's see. Hey, I've created a game and it took 6 months to create. Now it's almost done. I tried to share a screenshot, but don't know how to market the game. That is, I'd say, the hardest part. Marketing the game, it's even hard. Well, if you're a programmer, if you're a game developer, marketing the game is the hardest part because it's way outside of my skill set and the general game programmer skill set. I would say that you usually want to start marketing it right away, though. You want to start as soon as you have a concept and you have like some idea of what the game's going to look like. Start putting up little videos, sharing the concepts and the cool, unique things about it. And you really want to start building up that buzz a long time before you release. If you just try to release a game and then put out a bunch of info about it or put out like a big marketing push on it, I've seen a lot of people do it, and it usually doesn't work well, except for with like giant companies that have many $1 million budgets. The biggest reason is because there's so many games coming out, right? There's like, I forgot what it was. I saw some stat that said there was like a new game every minute just getting released on mobile. I don't know if that was accurate, but it's definitely in the many thousands a day at least that are getting dropped onto the app stores and the Google Play Store and stuff. So if you have a game that you're building, you really have to kind of market that along as you're building it up if you want to get big sales. Of course, you could have some blowout surprise and not need to do that, and everybody loves it and it becomes super popular. But in my experience, the games that do really well tend to be marketing really from early on, getting a lot of feedback, and then kind of somewhat implementing that feedback. Let's see some more questions. I was trying pooling today, but I couldn't get in-queue to work. Is there documentation? So the in-queue method is actually on the queue class. So there's an in-queue and a dequeue. When you say you couldn't get it to work, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. But if you look at the Q C# documentation, let me just see if I can pull it up. Just the look at the queue of type T. So it looks like I wish I had my screen visible. I'll paste the link in the chat. Let's just drop that down there. But it's got documentation on the actual class because it's just a C# class, but it's great for pooling. I don't know if my link posted. Doesn't look like it did. Well, just Google Q Microsoft documentation, and you'll see it. It's the top one. Let's see. What's the next question on here? I want to make sure I don't skip them. My questions are multiplayer related, like how should I start since UNet is deprecated? Yes, UNet deprecation kind of sucks. UNet was never perfect. It was better than the old thing, but not perfect, and it's better than kind of building your own. Oh, it looks like my Microsoft link went through. So what would I do here? It really depends a lot on the type of multiplayer game you want to build. If you want to build Overwatch or something like extremely high-end, fast-paced first-person shooter, you really have to spend a lot of time studying and learning how networking works and how network games work. There's no really simple solution for that if you want to be like super high scale and super high-end like that, where you have a really good, fast shooter. If you want to build something that's a lot slower, like turn-based, or just where it's not twitchy, right, where it's not that headshot twitchy type stuff. Then you can go to something a lot simpler. You could go over to like one of the pre-built solutions like Photon or Bolt, and those would work relatively fine. In fact, I mean, those will work good for those other games too. It's just that when you get to scale and you want to get to like the super high-end competitive level, you really have to have a really, really solid network layer, and you really have to understand it. It's the kind of thing that you have to spend a lot of time on. If people are interested in it, I might do some videos on that sometime soon. I'm still kind of waiting to see what that new network layer looks like, though, the new network stack that comes out when it's finally all done. Like they've released a little bit, but I know they keep making things just dramatically better, and it's like every time they do things, there's a big step up. So I'm waiting for that next step up to see what it looks like to do a bunch more network stuff, I think. Let's go to the next question. Start with dots or not yet? I would probably not quite yet. It looks like 2020 is the initial release. I'll probably start playing with it a lot more around 2020 and start seeing how I can build a couple sample projects with it. First off, I definitely wouldn't like try to build a big real project in dots yet. I would first go through and build a bunch of tutorials in dots, build a bunch of the little mobile games, just like when you're learning to use Unity or any other game engine. And I'd always recommend go through, build a bunch of small beginner games, just like, crank out mobile games, do like 1 a week, 2 a week. Do the same thing for dots until you get really comfortable with it. You've run into a bunch of the issues and pitfalls on things that don't really matter. And I would practice that way, and that's probably what I'll do around the 2020 releases. Just go through, build 4, 5, 6 of those little tutorials, maybe even make some videos on it, and then try to figure out what are the good parts that I can use into my game right now. What are the missing parts that still aren't quite ready yet, and how can I hook this all up? So that would be my advice. Like, don't jump right to it, but definitely look into it and start experimenting with it. The new system to make it easy to convert to dots looks freaking awesome, and it's nice because it's what a lot of people that I talked to said, like, I bet that's what they're going to do one day, is they're going to make it so that you don't really have to do much, and it just kind of automatically happens, and it's exactly what they did. Okay, let's go to the next question. What about sounds and voice? Guess it's the same with art. So sounds and voice, a couple things. You could just use a voice changer. It works great if you just want to like say a bunch of different things in some voices. Go spend 10, 20 bucks, get a voice changer app for the computer and record, and that'll work perfect. I've done that a couple times. The other thing that works great for that is Fiverr. You can find really good voice actors and sound effects guys on Fiverr, and just give them a list of all the stuff you want, spend 5, 10 bucks and get it all back. And they, in my experience, they've done a really good job. But like anything on Fiverr, it's, you got to look at the reviews, and you may have to try a couple people. But that's where I found really great sound and stuff, and I'd recommend going that way. Let's see, next one. Should I go with ECS or OPP? I think it's kind of back to the dots. I would probably not go to dots just yet, but I would start experimenting with it, get used to it, and be ready for it. See how it can make your projects better, but don't expect to just kick off a new project and do it all in dots right now. At least I wouldn't yet, just because I don't feel familiar with it enough, and I don't know very many developers who are using it. I don't have a lot of resources I can reach out to get feedback, and I don't know what's missing necessarily. So that's why I would go through and just do a lot of testing and experimenting first. Next question. Let's see. Oh, whoops. What do you recommend to learn to code shaders? I don't know what to recommend now because the new shader graph system makes it all very visual, and it's a totally different way to learn shaders. So that's a great question. I don't have a good answer. I'm going to try to come up with one, though, and maybe do a video on shader development really soon. I need to do that. It's a question a lot of people have, and it's something I haven't really talked about much. Let's see, more questions. Do you have a video that explains dictionaries? Yes. So I did a video on collections relatively recently. If you look back, it's like 3 or 4 videos old. It's all about collections. Talk about dictionaries, dictionaries of dictionaries, queues, stacks, maybe lists, and I think one other thing. So it's all about the different collections in C# that I use commonly, and a couple of different ways that I use them. So if you're interested in those, in fact, if you don't use dictionaries, you should definitely go look at it, because dictionaries, it's like a perfect little tool for so many common solutions, or some problems, not solutions. It's a very good solution to very common problems that you end up with. So Let's see. Next question. I have a problem remembering code that I wrote. What do you suggest to do? That's good. Like if you can't remember, well, I guess it depends what you mean when you say you can't problem remembering the code. If you're like not sure what you wrote at all and don't remember, I don't know. But if you're not sure what the code does, which is usually the problem that I would run into with this, or like I'd write code and then a week later, 2 weeks later, go back and look at it and I'm like, I don't know what this is. I don't remember why I did this or what it is, or how it works. And usually the best solution I found for that, and the thing that made that stop happening for me, is dramatically better naming of both variables and methods, and refactoring things so that the code reads like a list of actions. So the code reads very obviously what it's doing. If I have a chunk of code that's this big that doesn't explicitly get really obvious what it's doing, I'll try to refactor and extract that little chunk of whatever 5-10 lines into a method just so that I can know exactly what it does. I want to be able to read like, set a target, shoot the arrow, take some damage or whatever. Like I want to see all of these things in human readable form because humans are the only thing reading it. The compiler's never reading it. It's just converting all that into binary. So let's it's converting into IL. But anyway, I try to write the code so that it's as human readable as possible and focus on human readability above almost anything else until you get to performance problems. Then obviously hit the performance problems, but try to keep it readable. Let's go to another one. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Let's see. It says, hi, a question which is bugging my mind. I'm a beginner and I want to work as a Unity dev for 2 months. I want to ask, should I go with ECS or OP? Yeah, definitely don't go with ECS if you're starting off with Unity. It's like going to the alpha version of a new game engine and being like, I'm going to learn it all on this alpha thing. Because there are going to be issues. There are going to be things that don't work right. There's going to be a lot of conflicting information out there because the systems are in like rapid morphing. They're changing constantly and they don't match up with any of the Unity stuff. So if you're trying to learn Unity, don't try to learn it through ECS. Not now. Maybe in 5 years, that's the way to go. Now, I would definitely not start that way. And you don't really need ECS for 99% of games. In fact, I think about it this way. Pretty much none of the games that exist right now use ECS. They all work fine. But if you want to do crazy advanced stuff that those games don't do, maybe you'll need it in the future. Or if you want to save a lot of battery power or really optimize, there are some good reasons for ECS, but you can still build every game that exists right now without ECS. So don't think that you have to make that change right now. Is pixel art still relevant in 2019? It certainly seems to be. There's at least a good chunk of games that are just built on pixel art. I think Cuphead? Love that game. It's still, I think, pretty pixel arty. Well, I guess maybe not pixel art. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of pixel art games out there. I don't know that it's a ton. Like, I've never had anybody try to hire me to do contract work on a pixel art game, but I've seen a lot of people working on them myself. So I would say it's still relatively relevant. Let's see. Oh, somebody recommended some shader courses on Udemy. $10. It's worth the deal. Do you have a beginner course on the channel? Yeah, there's actually a beginner series that shows you how to get from basically no experience with Unity to making kind of a Flappy Bird / dragon clone that shoots out fireballs. I taught it to my son's class of 5th graders in little groups, and a lot of them were able to understand it and comprehend it. So I was trying to like shoot it down to that level, but the biggest problem with it that I have is that I split it into little chunks, so it's in like a bunch of 5 to 10 minute video chunks, and I feel like that kind of messes it up because it's a playlist of like 12 videos. So I'll probably do another one that goes through that in a single video. But if you're interested in that, it's hopefully easy to follow and kind of get you started to make a little game that you can deploy out to the web or mobile or something. How do you make a local multiplayer game? I have a game where you can choose a character as player 1 and player 2. So that's actually dramatically easier than making a networked multiplayer game. And I'll talk briefly about how you'd put that together. So with a single or a local multiplayer game, think of like a Super Smash Bros. Or any console game, right? Where you have multiple controllers, but you're all playing on one screen in one system. What you really need to do there is just separate out the input logic from the player and from the character. So usually what I'll have is kind of like there's 3 different layers or objects. I've got input things, and there's like an input for every controller. There's players, and for everybody that joins into the game, a new player is created, and then they're assigned. What happens is I read the input, say like, hey, the A button on controller 3 was pressed. Let's add them in as a player. So we create a new player, we assign the controller to the player, and then when we go to character select, we create a character and we assign the character to the player, who then is reading their input through the controller. You just have to think about that and kind of set that up from the start. If you try to squeeze it in later, or if you like hard code it to like, this guy's number 1, this guy's number 2, it's a bit harder to change. So I just get that system set up. I think I actually did a video on this with a spaceship game. If you look through, just look for, there's a spaceship one for local multiplayer where you like pick you join in, it's like up to 4 players. You join in, you pick a spaceship, and you fly around and shoot each other. It's basically a little Star Control duel ripoff, because I really liked the Star Control battles. Oh, it looks like I got a garbage truck outside. Might get loud. Let me see if I can find my spot and jump on to the next question. Are there Unity store assets that you use time and time again, or do you always start from nothing? There's none that I use in every project. I know some people who have certain assets that they use in just about every project. It depends a lot on the project for me. There are some that I really like that I'll go to, but there are none that I would say I use every single time. There are definitely a lot of common placeholder ones that I use, like that cartoon effects one. I use that whenever I need placeholder particles for anything. Doozy UI is really cool. I've only really got to play with it a bit though, but I want to start using that in more of my projects as well. But I can't say that there's any specific asset that I use all the time anymore. That used to be the case. Like I used to use DoTween and a couple other ones pretty constantly, but not so much anymore. Can you recommend any cool Unity assets made by Japanese developers? I couldn't. I could recommend some cool assets. I have no idea where the developers are, so I wish I could. I think, let's see, the realization part is, okay, let's go on. Just looking for more questions. On a mobile RTS, should I use lockstep? Generally, I think that's the way to go, unless it's like going to be a turn-based thing. If it's mobile, maybe it's turn-based, and lockstep might not be the right way. But yeah, I think generally with RTS, lockstep is kind of the standard. And that's a networking pattern, by the way. I don't want to dive into it right now, but if anybody's interested, just go look up lockstep RTS networking. And there are a lot of really good videos that explain not just how to do it, but why you do it and why it's important, and also some of the problems that it caused when people have really slow systems and how to address those. Let's see. Lots of very nice comments. Thank you for all the nice things everybody said. And let's go to next questions. Doing complete game tutorial. There was a question, any chance you're doing a complete game tutorial, maybe even with dots, paid or free, wouldn't matter. Yeah, I have some courses that I have out, and I got some new ones that'll be out eventually. That'll be kind of more of a complete game where you go through and build like a full shooter and stuff. I'll talk about that later though. It's not really ready. Yeah, I don't know. I might do some more though, where I go through some other 2D games. There are a lot, or other 3D games. There are a lot of little 2D game tutorials that I've done, but they're mostly just on the basic fundamentals of it, not so much the complete process of setting up the menu, setting up like that whole process of building the entire thing. I think that's what you're talking about. Somebody mentioned Cat-like coding for shaders. That's a really good site for that. Let's see, next questions. Wondering if it's more efficient to activate and deactivate or destroy and create objects. Okay, so it says, hi Jason, I'm wondering whether it's more efficient to activate, deactivate objects or create and destroy the objects. I'm referring to enemies and other assets that will be repeated in the scene. Thanks. Definitely activating and deactivating. In fact, that's what a pooling system does. So we'll pre-instantiate all of the objects, get them ready, get their state prepared, at least mostly prepared usually, and then pull them out of that pool and enable them, put them in the right place. And then when we were done with them, we disable them, put them back into the pool, and kind of hide them away. And the reason for that is the instantiation is heavy. Not only do we get the CPU hit from creating the objects, but we also get memory hits. So we end up with garbage collection. We're allocating stuff that then has to be cleaned up by the garbage collector later, which causes a spike in the game, slows things down. So generally, yeah, you don't want to destroy and create things. In fact, ideally, once your scene is loaded and your game is loaded, you want to never create or destroy anything again. Get zero garbage collection. Now, of course, that's really rare. It's pretty unlikely unless you super optimize things. But keeping that allocation down as low as possible and using pooling to do that is definitely the way to go. Okay, let's see if I can. Sorry, the questions kind of started scrolling up. Trying to get back up to them. Is there any way to use post-processing in mobile games? The post-processing stack works on a lot of the mobile stuff from what I remember. It's been a long time since I had to build something out to just flat mobile though, so not completely sure. I'll have to dig into that and check though. Then this next one. Hi, I've been developing games for years. Use some SE technique, but I always feel my code is lacking or not very technical, but it does the job. How to improve the code quality? It's a great question. So first, I'd say like if the code works and it does the job, like you've got mission one is kind of done, right? Like that's the most important part is getting it so that it works and it does whatever the task is. If it's a game, it plays and it's fun and people can play it and it works. Or if it's an app, it does whatever the job the app's supposed to do. But if you want to get the code cleaner, the best advice I have is to start watching what other people's code looks like. Start just watching a lot of tutorials on design patterns, code architecture, and stuff like that. Because what you'll see is that when you're looking at like design pattern videos, you'll start to notice things that look very familiar and things that you've probably done a couple times, but you did them slightly differently or you did them slightly different ways every time. And you start to pick up these patterns that they become reusable and you'll find slightly better ways to use them too. So your code will get better because you'll start to pick up these patterns. One thing to watch out for though is make sure that if you start to learn a ton of new design patterns that don't really line up with what you've been doing, don't just try to shove them in if they don't make sense. So like, don't be like, hey, I just learned the whatever pattern. I going totally blank. But I learned whatever new pattern and you just try to shove it in. I've seen people do that too. I mean, be honest, I've seen myself do that. Like try to shove in a new design pattern. Like, oh yeah, this is gonna be awesome. And I'm like, oh no, I just made a nightmare for myself, and I got to go undo it and revert a whole day's worth of code because I thought I was doing something awesome, but it really just overcomplicated it and confused myself. But I'd say, yeah, look at other people's code a lot. It's by far the best way to learn. You get better at coding by writing code over and over. You get a whole lot better at it by like writing code with other people and seeing other people write code together. Or if you have the opportunity to pair with somebody or mob program with somebody that's good on your level or maybe a little above, and just sit there and code with them and build things, and you'll start to get a little bit better. Hopefully that kind of helps. I know it's not a super short, easy tip to use, but it's what I would go with. Lots of design pattern videos and lots of code architecture videos, and just kind of pay attention and look for opportunities there. Okay. I made lots of projects in Unity, want to upgrade from intermediate to advanced. That's a very fine goal. I'd say a lot of the same I just said, I guess, in the last part. Look at a lot of design patterns and those kinds of things. Let me see. Jason Argo, what does GCD stand for? What does GCD stand for? I'm not sure. So he searched and didn't find it. What's the complete name of the channel? I don't know. Lost me. I'll try to circle back to that one. How are you making it? How are you making a living at the moment? I do contract work and I have courses available. So sell game dev courses and do contract work on video games. One I'm working on right now is an MMORPG. It's a lot of fun. AAA game. Do you simplify code you write in tutorials even when it's not optimal just to get the point across? I feel most tutorials don't use code you would see in a real game. So I used to do that a lot. I used to really simplify my tutorials down to make it very easy to understand what was going on. Now, what I try to do instead is isolate the specific thing that we want to focus on and try to set up an example where there's not a lot of extra stuff needed to show the example, but I can still show the example in a semi real world scenario. And I also try to like keep the code relatively clean now when I'm doing these tutorials, because I found that a lot of tutorials, it's easy to get lazy and just make a public game object thing to spawn and spawn it. But then when people are new, they pick up those patterns and they go, hey, sorry, I saw a comment down there. I got distracted. They pick up those patterns and they just think, hey, I got to make these things public instead of using the serialized field attribute, or I should shove all this stuff into this one class because that's the way it was done in the example. So I'd say I used to definitely simplify things down. I still probably simplify a bit, but I try to do it a little less now and try to make them a little bit more real world, just for that exact reason, because I don't want people seeing code that works fine in an example, but I wouldn't use in a real world scenario. It's also why I switched to using Writer for my videos, because really, like, if you want to do, like, if you're doing the same kind of stuff I do, almost every senior developer I know uses Writer, or they have some other weird preference. Most of them are using Writer, though, for their Unity development. And there are reasons for it. And I feel like if I don't just show that and I say, hey, like, go use MonoDevelop or whatever, like, I'm doing a disservice. So anyway, let's go to the next question. Let's see, I totally lost my spot here. Any tips on managing time? I have a full-time job and I work on my projects after office. I'm occupied the whole day and I'm not sure how this will work after I get married. Yes, that's a tough one. So if you're working full-time and doing game development and on the side and married, you definitely need to talk to your wife about it and kind of communicate really well, because you don't want, you have to spend time with family, kids, wife, whatever, friends, or else eventually you have none of those things, right? So for managing time like that, I would say, definitely try to focus on, well, once you have the wife and all that, like, spend the time that they're awake and doing the things with them, and then spend that extra time when they're doing things that you're not really interested in, or like they're watching TV or watching movies, or all of the time that people waste, spend the wasted time doing your game development stuff so that you can still spend the quality enjoying time together. When it comes to doing game development on the side with a full-time job, though, it can be hard because it's like a passion thing. It's very easy to engulf yourself in it and just keep building games and not want to do anything else all the time. And then you got the whole job that's eating up a lot of time too. So I wish I had some really good advice for this, but I'd say mostly just cut out all of the extra crap. Like, one of the things I have to do, in fact, one of the things I'm doing today is uninstalling MTG Arena again. Like, I've had it uninstalled a couple times. I reinstall it and I find that, like, suddenly I'll catch myself and I've blown like 4 hours playing Magic card games or whatever. Like, so remove the distractions as much as you can. So if that's an option, that's what I would go for. Let's see. Next questions. Overwatch is made with ECS. Yes, that's true. It's made with kind of an ECS on Unreal, though. And it's also got a bunch of visual scripting, but it's the same kind of idea. It's the same pattern, just not Unity ECS is kind of what I meant. But you could still build Overwatch either with or without it. The networking layer in there is what's really awesome, though. So, as you think, when full dots ECS, yes. So the question here was, when ECS comes out, do I think that the old format of building games will still be supported? I'd say yes, and it looks like what's going to happen is not only will they support it, but they'll allow you to build in the standard way and do relatively easy conversions to ECS to get most of those performance increases. In fact, it wouldn't completely surprise me if ECS just became a thing that happened almost automatically under the hood and you didn't have to do anything. I mean, I don't really expect that to happen, but if it did happen, I wouldn't be completely shocked, right? Like, they're just like, hey, yeah, now everything automatically goes to ECS. who knows? All kinds of crazy new stuff gets invented all the time, and I'm always impressed. So let's see. Next question. Is it possible you can answer my question about copyrights? It's possible, but I'm sure the answer is 0% valid because I don't really know anything about copyrights. I could answer it, but it would be useless advice. I was looking into Steam matchmaking and their network solution. I haven't used Steam's networking solution, but I've heard really good things about it. The Steam SDKs are generally pretty good. I would say if you're not sure what to use for networking and you're looking for something and you don't mind being, locked on to Steam, then sure, try it out. Don't know for sure that that's still a thing though, that it locks you completely to only Steam games. I think it used to, and it used to require Steam for everything, and it may still do that. So just something to consider, but no reason not to use it. I've heard really good things about it from, well, at least I'm pretty sure Kyle told me he really liked it too. Let's see, next. What happened with code reviews? I just have not really had the time to do many code reviews lately. It's something I'd like to do again. In fact, if somebody's got something really cool they want code reviewed and don't mind the code and project being shared publicly on a YouTube video, shoot me an email. It's just jason@unity3d.college, and we can chat and maybe I can do it. Let's see. Do you believe it's worth the extra time to implement accessibility in games? If your game is popular and a lot of people are playing it, yeah. If your game is like a relatively small indie game, I don't necessarily know. I guess part of it is just being insulated in a little bit of a bubble. I don't really have any close friends or relatives who have these problems, so it's not a thing that pops up regularly. Or at least if I do, I don't remember. They probably do, and they're like watching, like, hey, you know me. But yeah. So it's not something that I put a lot of effort into, except for when we get to really big games. And even in the really big games, it tends to be a lot of an afterthought, to be honest. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing, but I would say you probably don't need to put too much energy into it unless there are people specifically asking for it. Just because it distracts from all the other stuff. And it's not to say that it's not an important thing. It's just that there are a million important things to do in your game. And if nobody plays it with those issues, then it doesn't matter at all. And I guess you want to hit the issues that are going to hit the most players, like getting your game done and making it fun first, then worry about all the other little stuff, I guess. Okay, next question. I think I lost a couple. Okay, what's your favorite game you worked on? To be honest, I think it's still Vanguard up there. It was just a lot of fun to work on. I don't know that it was my favorite game to. At the time it was like my favorite game to play too. Oh, weird. Focus just switched as soon as I turned around and pointed. But yeah, I'd say it was probably that. It was a lot of fun. And it was probably the first one too, so it might have a little bit of a special thing going on. Let's see. More questions. Where were we? I was wondering whether. Oh, that's the destroy and create objects. That I already answered that one. Apparently, I've bounced around. I have a physics character controller problem. It's interesting. If you have a very specific problem that you need like to debug, we have meetups on Wednesdays. Like, feel free to hop in. Just go search for Unity Architecture meetup. It's just online. That's on Meetup or on the Patreon. It's linked to, and then go in there and screen share and go over problems too. So, and that might be a good one for that. So, do you know where I can find burst compiler examples? No, I don't. It's not something I've really had a chance to dig into yet. Sorry, the questions, like they're just more questions than I've seen normally. Not used to catching up with them. Any interest in making a tutorial for editor scripting side of the new prefab workflow? Ooh, that's an interesting idea. I have interest in it now. I hadn't thought of it before, but that's pretty interesting. There's probably a lot of hooks in there that I don't know about and a lot of us don't know about. So yeah, I think I might take a peek at that. In fact, let me just write myself a little note in my notebook. Let's see, so new prefab workflow scripts. Editor script, sorry. Yeah. So, do you have ideas for that? Let me know too. Like what types of things. Like the one you have in there for deleting objects of child prefab and stuff could be interesting. I'm curious what. I guess I'll dig in and see what things are available in there too. Um. Okay, so the next question was about they made a 2D platformer game, but the rigid body seems really bad for the controller. Do you have some tips? So there's a really good, if you really want to make a 2D platformer, there's a really good 2D platformer asset. I'm totally spacing on the name, but if you just look for 2D platformer asset, it's like the top one in the asset store, and it has a really good controller to make it super smooth. Um, Getting a 2D platformer controller right just takes a good amount of tuning and time. It's not like getting it in there with the default settings. It's not going to feel like the most amazing character. In fact, I'd look at oh man, what was that video? There's a cool video where they showed how Mario jumps, for example, and the speed and rate of the different parts of the arc. So you really want to look at and research 2D character controllers if you're trying to build a platformer and see kind of because there are different ways that it can work. So you want to look at the way that you want it, the game that you want it to act most like, and then figure out how they did it for that specific game. So I wouldn't say that there's like a generic tip for making any 2D platformer. It's kind of based on the type of gameplay and feel that you want to have. But also that 2D let me see if I can find that. What is it? 2D Unity 3D platformer asset store. Let me see. I've played with it. I've used it. I can't remember the name of it though. Corgi Engine. That's it. So Corgi Engine. If you're looking at building a platformer and you really just want to make the platformer, I'd take a look at that, or maybe even just look at it as an example of the controls. And they use it's non-physics based character controls. It's pretty interesting and pretty cool. Let's see, where are we at? Questions. Are you using visual scripting is the next question. Nope, I don't really use any visual scripting except for visual scripting systems that I create for designers. So for game designers, I don't want them writing scripts usually, mostly because it's not natural for them. It's hard for them. It's not easy for them to come up with the flow and the things that they need to do. They don't do this every day, right? They design games, they don't write code. So having them write scripts is usually not the optimal thing. So I'll use visual scripting for them, but it's usually making a separate visual scripting system that they can hook into. And it's to control small things like AI systems, not actual scripts or game control. Some people really like visual scripting for their game control and stuff. I've just never been a fan. I can see some benefits, but it's too hard for me to take in when there's a big graph of stuff, and I know that there are another couple dozen other big graphs of stuff. So I like code in C#, but designers, visual scripting is great for them. So when it comes to optimization, would you try to start optimizing at the start of the project, especially when you want to push the visual quality to be as high as you can? Yes and no. So I'd say yes, you want to start optimizing at the start of the project, just not at the start of each feature. So I guess kind of the way that I like to do it is build a thing or a portion of the game, get it working, and then try to clean it up a little bit and then optimize it and then go on to the next feature, do the same thing and kind of go step by step. But if you wait too long and you just start building things and building things and building things and then go, oh yeah, I'm just going to optimize it later, it will probably turn into a mess. Now, sometimes people do that because they're not sure they're even going to finish the game, right? They're like, I just want to build this game, and if I get it done and I need to make it faster, I'll make it faster. Totally fine. But if you know that your game is going to come out, you have a goal, especially some performance goal in mind or some performance target, then I would say make sure that you profile and optimize along the way. Look for issues, and you may find that you've got big architectural performance issues, like you've got something that's just generating tons and tons of memory, and you don't want to keep building on top of that, right? If you have a bad system or a bad thing at your core, you want to try to fix that and not build a bunch of stuff on top of it and make your game worse and harder to fix later. So profile relatively early, but don't micro optimize and don't over optimize little things. So don't like go try to shave off a couple milliseconds here and there from something that happens rarely, right? Find the parts that are in kind of your core game loop and the biggest things and hit those. Let's see, more questions. I wish it would keep my place here. Let's see. So next one. Where are we? Oh my goodness, there are way too many questions. Try to keep up, guys. Sorry. So during an interview for a gaming company, what kind of code questions do they ask you? Is it more development related or like algorithms? That's a really good question. And it varies quite a bit. In my experience, when people don't know what to ask you, they start to just go to random algorithm questions and puzzles because they don't really know. It usually is because they don't know what it is you're going to be doing exactly, or they don't know enough about what the job is that you're going to be coming into. Like they don't know how to ask you like, can you do the actual parts of the job? So they'll dive into algorithm questions. Also, there occasionally you're going to run into people that just like to ask algorithm questions because it makes them feel smart. That's always fun too, right? But if you're interviewing with people who are working, like doing the very specific thing that you're doing, like they're working on the same project, a lot of the time they'll ask you things that are relatively relevant to that project. So they'll ask you about, if it's a beginner position for Unity stuff, they'll probably ask about a lot of the fundamentals. Like, can you explain prefabs and scriptable objects? When would you use one or the other? How do you spawn things? Like, and they'll look for things like, do you mention that, like, hey, if you got to spawn a lot of things, you need a pool. And they're going to look for, I should say, what I look for a lot of the time is people to not just answer the question, but to answer the question and then maybe have a little bit of extra insight into it. Like, say, like, if I've got a game, like a simple question, be like, if I have this, I'm building a shooter, and I want to launch rockets. Like, how explain to me how you would do that? How would you set up a rocket launcher in a game? Very simple, and just have them go through the logical process of that. Now, there are also sometimes where people will just ask random math questions like, what does vector 3 dot dot do, or what's a dot product, right, or a cross product? And those are good to know. They're good to memorize and be able to use in your projects and stuff, right? But a lot of the time, it's a mix of just like, how do you do these different things? Like, how do you use events? How do you use Unity events? How is Unity different from non-Unity stuff, like regular C# stuff? I don't know. There are a lot of questions. In fact, I was going to do a video on interview questions, and maybe I'll just do that because that's a good thing to do. In fact, my buddy Jeff was helping write up a big list of these things. I'll talk to him. Maybe we'll put something together. That'd be good. So let's see. Next question. A ball with a different physics system from Unity's, but I don't know how to handle collision. Do I use Unity's rigid body and apply corrective forces, or that's a hard one. I don't know. Without a lot more context, I don't know if I could give a really good answer to that. That's kind of tough. I'll try to think about it though, see if anything comes to mind. So hi, can you make tutorials for a leaderboard and achievement system? Sure. Yeah, that's actually a fun one to do. There are a bunch of different services. Usually I've used the Steam leaderboards and Steam achievements, or the Google or Apple ones. But yeah, you can definitely do that. That'd be an interesting one to do too. Pooling gave me serious boost when I enabled it. Yes, pooling is awesome. Definitely. Let's see. I'm just trying to make code modular with events and inheritance. Yep. I may have missed the question there though. Is it possible to make a multiplayer or co-op game that connects with players by Bluetooth? Something like local multiplayer. Yeah, you can do that. It's probably, if you think about it, it's going to be about as hard as making a regular networked game, if not a little bit harder than making a regular just TCP or UDP network game. As you're doing the Bluetooth and local multiplayer stuff. So yeah, it's possible. I haven't done it myself, but you can definitely do it. In fact, I might want to do that. I've been wanting to build like a cool Magic the Gathering life counter app where you can install a thing on everybody's phone and have like a big display in the middle and have it all sync up. So maybe that would be a neat example of a thing I could do with Bluetooth too, because I was always trying to figure out how I would do that without requiring an internet connection. So that's kind of cool. It's a good idea. Jason, a lot of tutorials cover writing a player controller. I was wondering if there's anything wrong with starting with the Unity player controllers included with the starter assets. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it's a very generic controller, right? It's a controller that's not built specifically for your game. It's a good place to start. I would say if you don't really have any specific uses that are different and that character controller works, just give it a go. Eventually, when you get into like wanting to change things too dramatically, you'll probably find that you want to rewrite the character controller. But if it works for what you want to do and it lets you just build the game, I would stick with it and just build the game. Don't focus on rebuilding things that already exist that work. Focus on making the fun stuff that people care about. Oh, and that's fun to build too. Okay, is it fine to quit a job and work on my own game? I already finished some levels and core code structure. I mean, I think that's up to you. I wouldn't count on working on your own game that you haven't released making money. I mean, a lot of games just don't make money, right? A lot of games release and make $10. So don't count on like you're going to make a game and just because you made the game, it's going to be some giant successful blowout hit. You're never going to need to work again. I would say don't quit your job probably until you've finished and released the game or you have something else lined up. Now, if the job is not a game development job and you're just trying to get into game development job, I'd say keep the job and just start applying for game dev jobs. Like, start applying for, if you're new to it, junior jobs and just try to get in there. Just keep going and make that transition while you have that stability. Just keep looking for those jobs while it's possible. Because a lot of people want to like build games without ever working on anybody else's game, and you can do it. It's certainly possible, but it's definitely a lot harder, right? You're going to learn a lot more just working with other game developers, and you'll get paid to do it. So you kind of get paid to learn. It's just one of the things I love about programming. I learned almost all of my programming on the job. I've been basically paid my entire life to learn how to code. I mean, I learned a little bit, when I was a kid before I started, but a lot of it was just on the job. And I say that, but I mean, I also spend a lot of time when I'm not working learning just because it's so freaking fun, right? It's the one kind of job where like you can just get into it, you can learn stuff constantly and have a blast doing it. I think there's probably some other jobs where people do that, but I don't know. I just don't picture like a veterinarian going out there like, oh man, I really want to go learn about this new veterinarian stuff every day after they're done working, right? Like they may do it like go to a conference every now and then, but programmers like, hey, look, there's a new video. This new tech thing just came out. Oh, look, this new pattern. Oh, this new thing. Like I'm watching Unite videos from Copenhagen now. Oh, like got like 60 hours of stuff, all voluntary just because it's fun and exciting. So yeah, try to get a game dev job before you quit your existing job is what I would say. Let's see. Can I easily remake games, but when it... Oh, okay. Yeah, so the statement here wasn't really a question, but... Oh, GDC is Game Developer Conference. Sorry, somebody mentioned that down below. But the question, or they said, I can easily remake games, but when I start to make my own game, I get lost. That is, I think, it's a good place to be at. So it's a good place to be at as a programmer. If you feel like when there's a game that exists, you can look at it, kind of absorb how it works, figure it out, and recreate it. That's exactly the kind of skill that you want as a programmer. Now, that's not necessarily a game designer skill, and it's why those are different jobs, right? Designing a game and making it fun is so much different from figuring out how it works and making it work. And I struggled with this for like when I started making, being a game programmer, I wanted to be a game designer. I didn't want to be a game programmer. I wanted to design big giant dragon fights and all kinds of cool stories and stuff. I didn't. I did the programming just because I was like, hey, this is like a neat way that I can start to do this. And then I fell in love with programming and found out that it was really the thing for me, not so much design. And I didn't really come to that realization though until I worked alongside a lot of really good designers and just watched. Like I would design something and then I would talk to my designer friends and they'd just blow me out of the water. Like they show me stuff. They come up with cool ideas and cool ways to do things that I thought were really awesome. Or like I'd give them a scene, like I'd set up a scene in Unity, like here's the level, and then I give it to the designer, and suddenly it goes from looking like this crappy programmer made game to AAA quality. Because they know exactly what to do, where to put the things, how to lay stuff out, how to adjust the flow of stuff. So I would say don't worry too much about the fact that you're not able to just create new things from scratch. That's why you pair up with a designer or an artist or designer slash artists and build games together. Like make the fun stuff, and if you can figure out a cool design, cool. If not, then have somebody else help you with that part, and you do the fun part of building it. Okay, next. Oh, okay. Somebody else said right below GDC, and they're talking about game design documents. So I don't know. I'm a little bit lost on there. Like I said, I'm talking about stuff that's a couple questions old. Let's see. Ever work with VR was the next question. Yep, released like 6 VR games on Steam. It was a big obsession of mine. When the Vive came out, I kind of fell in love with it. Wanted to make a lot of games with it. It was like, oh, this is freaking awesome. Still play with it sometimes. Still make games occasionally, but not as much just because I haven't come up with it. I built all the things that I thought were really exciting and cool to build, and I haven't come up with any new cool ideas again because I'm terrible at the design part. If a friend came to me with like this amazing VR game design, I'd probably just code it up real quick and be right back in there. On huge world, imagine open world. Okay. How will you load your game objects? Okay, so this is a question about streaming very large worlds. That's not an easy one. There's a streaming asset on the asset store, this world streaming one that I've heard good things about, but I haven't actually used. I forgot the name of it. I think that also being able to load scenes asynchronously now with the addressable stuff too is going to make that a little bit easier for being able to load those into memory and unload them. But it's not an issue that I've really had to do much myself, where I had to load in a big world and unload parts of it. And it's a good one though, and maybe I'll do a video on that too. Let me write that down as an idea. It's one of those things that just doesn't hit very many people. It's like a really fun, interesting problem, but it's the thing that like comes up like once a year. So let me write down the big open worlds, because it'd definitely be fun to do. Maybe I can find a good tutorial on it too instead. But I'll see if I can put something together. Would you use reflection so you don't break the open close principle? No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that using reflection to get around open close probably just means there's an issue with the code. I usually use reflection when there's something like that I have to do manually, that I would have to do every time I add something. And it's usually for something where like I need to add these things constantly, and I'm constantly adding in new ones. And there's like, if I don't use reflection, I got to add it in 3 or 4 places. So I just use reflection and have it automatically scan through my project and initialize those things. And it's also something I only do like at initialization time, not something that you'd want to do while you're running, right? So it's like loading stuff from the database or whatever. Maybe I use some reflection to fill out those properties. Or to load in different effect types. I did a video kind of about that a while ago, but I wouldn't use it just to get around open close, because it seems like it's kind of just breaking the pattern or the principle. Let's see. I just scrolled again. Sorry. Let's see. Am I hyped for the visual scripting that's coming to Unity? I think it's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of visual scripting systems already out there, so if it's not better than the existing ones, I don't know. I'll be more hyped about it when I actually see it in action. So, It's one of those things that it feel like it's too far off and I haven't seen enough to get really excited. My wife says that a lot too, though. Like I don't really tend to get excited about things until I have like a solid date and it's getting really, really close. Um, let's see. Making a game that has a lot of asynchronous functions that depend on each other. Should I make their communication with each other entirely event-based? Probably. Some sort of event or signaling system, or if they're yielding and they're using async and await, that is generally pretty good in there. It's hard to say though without really good context of the project. If I missed any questions, by the way, please just drop them again because they're going by really fast. It's hard to keep up. Can you tell me a good path to lead me to master C#? Build a lot of games. Start coding games and start coding a lot of different things. Don't code things where you're gonna shove yourself into a corner and have to keep doing the same one thing over and over. Try a bunch of very, very different things so that you can kind of get a wider exposure to it and practice. It's just a lot of practice. If you're not practicing, you'll probably never master it. And again, I mentioned it earlier too, design pattern videos and architecture videos, Bob Martin videos, really great for that kind of stuff. It'll get you kind of in the mindset of writing less code to do the same amount of work or more work in a better way. So remember that writing a lot of code is not like valuable. People used to get paid by the line of code. It was the stupidest thing ever because writing a lot of code is generally bad. You want to write the least amount of code to do the job in a clean, fast, efficient way. That's not going to be a problem. You don't want to over-engineer or just write too much stuff that you don't need. It's nothing better than deleting unneeded code, at least for me. I love it. Let's see what's next. So, somebody, welcome to the first live stream you got on. Hopefully you're still here by the time I got to your comments here. Let's see. Still trying to figure out when to use events. Well, you use events to separate concerns, right? When you want a thing to be able to notify other stuff that something's happened, but not care that other stuff knows about it. Like, say you've got a weapon in your game and you want everything to know when its ammo has changed. You want the UI to know, hey, the ammo has changed on this so it can update. You don't want your weapon to know that there's a UI. You don't want your weapon to have any way to even reference the UI, ideally. So you'll have an event on that weapon or on the weapon's ammo that then fires off, says, hey, ammo changed, and then there's a UI that could be listening for that, and it can update based on that. Now, you might not have a UI even available. Maybe you're watching on like a stream view of it where you can't see that, or something else. Or you have a VR version where the UI is completely different, and you want to rebind that, or whatever it is. So you use the events essentially to separate the stuff, though, so that the classes don't necessarily need to know about other classes and can still work together. And I've done a couple videos on events. I'd check them out and see if they're helpful. If not, let me know though, and maybe I can do some more like just concepts of why you would use events and how you would separate things out with them. As a game design student, I feel like I need to grasp code. Yep, definitely. It's a mobile game. You need help with input cross-platform. Okay, that's definitely a weak spot for me right now. NavMesh agents and synchronization with animation. You have some ideas for that. You'll want to. So it's another kind of advanced one, but generally what you want to do is adjust the animations to match up with that speed of it. Usually when I want them to super match, the NavMesh agent's not necessarily moving the object itself either. It's just getting me the info about where it wants to move, and then I'm controlling the movement and controlling the animation. And you need to use IK, the inverse kinematic stuff. So you kind of have to tie all of that in to make it look right, because I assume the issue you're talking about, and the thing that a lot of people run into the first time you set up a NavMesh agent with an animated character is like they're walking, but they're also kind of sliding. So their feet don't match up with their movement at all. And that's mostly, it's IK and character controller stuff. You really have to somewhat write your own. It's not a super simple thing, but it's not too complicated. Just don't try to use the NavMesh agent's movement and then try to make the animation line up, I guess. try to take control over both of those things yourself. And the IK. The IK is a very important part to making it look right. Okay, let's see. Usually not a fan of assets, but Odin, yeah, can't use it without Odin. I understand that. Odin's really cool. The only reason I don't use Odin all the time is that I constantly record videos and I don't want to confuse people so that they think that like my UI is different than theirs. So I pull in the focus. I really got to get a new camera. That's the main reason that I don't use it in all my stuff, though, is just that I don't want to confuse people. But I'd say if you're not recording a bunch of videos, yeah, definitely use Odin. Do you know if there's a way to use normal maps with the Atlas or Sprite Packer? I've never tried or needed to. I don't know. Sorry. I wish I did. I do know that with the latest version of 2019.3, you have to pull in the Sprite package to actually pack your sprites, though, which was interesting. They've split that out finally. I listened to a podcast on Spotify. I didn't even know it was on Spotify. Neat. Okay. It must have been something I was on, hopefully. Let's see. What other questions are we at? Have you worked with a large game company before? And if so, do you have personal experience with crunch before a game's release? Oh, I even titled this thing about crunching. Yeah, so the first game company I worked at was Sigil. Wow, there it is. All mixed up. So Sigil right here. I worked there for 3 weeks and then got laid off. But they got bought by Sony, so I shortly after went and worked at Sony on that game. And there was a little bit of crunching that happened, but it wasn't something that really impacted me much. It was mostly, so I'll just talk briefly about the crunching that I've seen in the past. First, I just want to preface it with, it's not super common in the places that I've been. And I think that it varies a lot just based on the type of game and the type of game company that you want to be at. And I've known some people who worked at some of the bigger companies that release some of the super popular titles. I don't want to call anybody out. And I've heard some really terrible horror stories about like people having to work crazy hours and like doing it constantly for months on end. And feeling like if they didn't, they were going to lose their job or get fired. I don't know that anybody was told that, but a lot of people were kind of in that was the feeling that they got. And I don't know if it's just that there's so many people that want the jobs that nobody is really willing to kind of push back on it, or if it's just that they're super into the thing and they really want it to be the best. And I mean, really, when you're shipping a console game like that, a giant thing like that, you have a very, very, very hard deadline. Like you have a set date. If you miss that date, things are going to be very bad. So you've got to get it done by that time. Most game companies that I've been at, most smaller game companies, indie game companies, they're not nearly as bad with that. People aren't crunching constantly where they're having to put in, 40, 50, 80, I said 40, 60, 80, 100 hours a week, right? Most people are working 40 hours, maybe a little bit more. But people in general, when they're working on games, and I think probably when they're working on anything creative, tend to self-crunch or tend to work more than they're paid for just because it's kind of like it's a passion job, right? Like it's a creative job and you get into it and you kind of get excited about it and you just don't want to stop. You want to see the result of the thing that you're building and you want to see this thing done. You want to show everybody like I'm building this freaking awesome system. I'm going to get it done. It's going to be badass. I'm going to keep polishing it and then I'm going to show it to people. Everybody's going to love it, right? And you get that excitement and you just kind of keep wanting to go at it. And this happens for game programmers and some other programmers too who are working on things that they have a lot of creative freedom on. Like I've had the same feeling working on really cool scalable web services, right? Where it's like a really neat thing that I'm working on and I'm getting to be super creative about it and apply new things and try new stuff out. If you're just doing boring same old thing over and over, fixing bugs or whatever, you're not going to be in that same mindset. So the crunching that I've seen, for the most part, tended to be very self-imposed. And it was either because people were super excited about the thing that they were doing, or because they dramatically underestimated the complexity or how long something was going to take. So they got an idea like, hey, this is going to take me 2 weeks, and it takes them 2 months, right? And then what happens is they're constantly just in there working on it. They're working 10, 12 hours a day because they're starting to fall behind and things are going to miss their ship dates or whatever. And it's like, hey, is this thing going out, or are we going to have to ship without it because it's, whatever. So that's generally where I've seen most of the crunching. I've seen very, very, very little enforced, like where people are like, hey, you need to come in and everybody needs to be working 10 hours a day. Because really, you don't get a benefit. Like, I'd say if you're working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day in the office, you're still probably doing about 5 hours of quality work. And the rest of it is distraction. It's stuff that you're going to rework. It's very hard to get that much real quality work out of any person. Tired, things start to fall off, and just sitting there in the office, you got a brain desk isn't necessarily going to help, especially again when it comes to these creative things. If you're doing you're packing a box, yeah, you can pack boxes for 12 hours and your efficiency might fall off a little bit, but it's not going to fall down to zero. If you're writing code or designing stuff, your efficiency could drop to zero or even negative, to the point where you're now causing more harm than good just by working too much on it. So if you don't want to worry about crunching, just learn a little bit about the company beforehand. It's usually just that management doesn't plan very well and doesn't keep track of stuff, or they listen to estimates that are not right. Like they believe estimates, and estimates are generally wrong. So yeah, again, crunching, it's not a giant nightmare in game development. I know a lot of people worry like, hey, I want to make games, but I don't want to work 80 hours a week. Most game developers I know don't work 80 hours a week. A lot of them are some of the most chill, semi-lazy people I know. Like they're really cool, happy, like they get the work done and then they go on with their lives. So not something to worry about too much. Okay, let's go on to some more questions though. Let's see, what do we have down here? What books do you recommend for video game programmers? Oh, that's a hard one. I Clean Code, and it's not a code related book, and Code Complete. I'd say those are the two that I would recommend. And neither one of them are game programming books. They're just really, really good programming books in general. But overall, to be honest, I don't read a whole lot of the books. I like the audio books, which makes it really hard for programming because I just read really, really slow. But those two, read all the way through, amazing books, definitely worth it. What I like to do, though, is listen to podcasts and recaps of books where they go over all of the things in the book audibly so I can listen and keep up. Right? Let's see. What do we got let's find more questions. Update dynamic canvases by the whole. Okay, so there's one question here about Unity UI systems and updating the canvases. I'm not sure exactly what. Oh wait, there's more to it. In my project, causes visible flashing. Oh, I have not seen that. It's hard to say what the flashing is there. So he's saying that he's got multiple canvases updating. And instantiating objects when they drag and drop. It's hard. I would say you definitely want to have the multiple canvases for performance. Well, depending on how big your UI is. But why it's flashing like that, it's hard to say. I haven't seen that. Normally, that's not an issue. So there's something else going on there. I'm not sure what it is. You can send a screenshot or a video of something to my email. I can check it out later. Okay, let's see. More questions. Can you learn enough in Unity if you're free to learn to make things to get a job as a developer? How hard is it to become a game tool developer? Yes, you could definitely learn enough in Unity to get a job as a Unity developer. In fact, I think when I started my first Unity job, I'd actually used zero Unity. We kind of had an idea that we wanted to make a game. I'd had Unreal experience before, zero with Unity, but I did know C#. And was able to get a job and build a game and stuff. If you've been doing it for a year, you should definitely be able to get a job. and you should probably be able to get a job faster than that. Like if you're doing it, a good amount of time, you're spending 4 8 hours a day for a year or 6 months even, you should probably be able to get in at a junior level and start doing some game development. I wouldn't wait a year to even start. I'd start, get going, get involved in some local user groups and some other things. Any of the local game dev community that's available, just join up, go to those things, start to meet people, and you'll probably end up finding a job way faster than a year. It also depends a lot of course, on your region. Like where I am here in Southern California, there are tons of Unity meetups I can attend, and there are constantly people hiring at those meetups at all different levels. So you just go there, make friends, and start to learn to code. You'll find jobs. It's not too hard. There are a ton of Unity jobs, a ton of game dev jobs. But there was a second part to that question, which was, what does it take to become a game tools programmer? And that's a I'd say it's a very different thing. So I started off my game development career as a tools programmer, and I was making games or game tools that were 0% in the game. They're actually totally outside the game, just tools for the designers to work with content data. So they're working with the SQL database and just tools on top of that. And then you start to build tools that are like in the game. For like placing things or whatever type of stuff. Sorry, stupid Dropbox just keeps beeping at me. I'm going to mute. Hopefully nothing important pops up. So if you want to become a tools programmer, the other thing that you'll usually need to do is learn a lot about the art pipeline, because most of the time, depending on the game, most of the time the tools programmers are very heavy into the art side of stuff. So they're figuring out like the pipeline from Maya or Max into your game and any conversions and things, and hooking in these different tools, getting them all working together. It's not always the case. I never really had to do any of that because we already had somebody doing that. So I just kind of took over the other stuff that wasn't that, which was all of the content related data or editor type extension stuff. But I would say it's about the same. It's also a lot easier to get a job as a tools programmer. At least it was when I was looking previously. And it's just because not as many people apply for those jobs. They just don't. When I've seen the job openings, they seem to get just a lot less applications. A lot less people are interested because most people just want to build the game. They don't want to build the tools. I personally love building the tools because then you're delivering something to the people that you work with. Like all of the people that use your thing, it's not the gamers out there, it's the designers that are 10 feet away from you that are all like, hey, I love that thing, that was awesome. And if you do something bad, they're like, hey, that thing was terrible, can you fix it? And then you fix it, like, oh, that's awesome too, let's go to lunch. So building tools is fun. I highly recommend it if it's something you're interested in. Okay, let's see if we can find some more questions here. I got asked, how many lines of code have you written on a job interview? So the answer is always too many. I wrote too many and I had to delete a bunch of them. Right? That's a terrible question. Well, I guess it's a question where if you can give a solid number, you're like, I don't know, about 1,000, then it can easily disqualify you, right? Like if you can give a number that's really low, like you just barely started doing anything, or you haven't really been writing code, then I guess it could be used as a good disqualifier. How do you feel about nullable references coming to C# 8? I think they're pretty cool. I haven't really seen them in use too much in non-Unity projects, but I think that it's going to be interesting to be able to make things nullable or not nullable, being able to specify that they're not allowed to be null. Let's see. For a hack and slash game, what's the best way to detect enemies? Oh, for enemies to detect players in range. So it depends on the game. If it's a game where you want to do like line of sight checks, what I usually do is like activate all of the enemies in an area when we've come into the area, and then they either do a distance check to the player. Like if there's only one player, it's very easy because you just find that one player, do a distance check to him. Or if it's you want them to see, then what we do is do a distance check. If they pass that distance check, do a raycast to see if there's line of sight or make sure that it's not blocked, and then aggro if both of those pass. Best code is unwritten one. Yep. The best lines of code are deleted lines, or the methods. The little bit that's around all of the stuff that's deleted. That's the good part, right? Let's see. Oh, I already answered that one. Can you make money selling assets in the Unity asset store? Yes. I have done a little bit of that, not much, but I know of people who've done a lot. And the ones that I've seen that are really successful are either very big, very popular apps that are just downloaded by everybody. Like TextMesh Pro was a huge one, right? They even got brought into the Unity ecosystem. And there are a couple other ones that were like that, like the UI system before that was there. What I found for the big code systems, though, is that like if they're really that good that everybody wants them, Unity's probably going to try to pull it in and make it good after a while. And who knows, like how that impacts them. I really have no idea. That could have been the best thing for them. But the stuff that works great for asset store is art. If you can make art and you can package it up in a way that's very easy to use in Unity, most people do a really sloppy job of it. But if you can get it ready, make it very easy to use, and have good art and have a lot of it, you can make a ton of money. I've heard plenty of people making 6 figures just selling art, passively. They just put up art, put up new stuff, and obviously it's not gonna just be instant overnight. You're not gonna go, hey, I put up a bat and now I'm a millionaire, right? No, it's like you put up dozens of these things. You keep going and keep putting stuff up, improving the quality, and you can definitely build up a very strong passive revenue stream. Talked to a couple guys who've done exactly that, and really I'm pretty jealous of them because it's impressive stuff. But I have 0 art skills, so as the beautiful skull back there shows, nobody wants to buy that. Can you learn enough? Oh, I already answered that one. Do you have or use UMotion Pro? I do not. I've seen it. I've just never had a situation where I needed it. It does seem kind of interesting, though. What resources would you recommend for someone willing to create a multiplayer backend for a 2D platformer game? I mean, if you want to make a backend for it and like a plugin type thing for it, the biggest problem and the hardest thing to do is making it super performant. You want it to be like 0 garbage allocation and as fast as possible. Because you don't want to give people a thing that's going to be bad for their game. You don't want your network layer to be generating garbage and causing spikes and stuff. And you don't want all of the stuff that you're creating. And that's kind of the case with any asset. And one of the problems with a lot of assets is that they don't generally take performance into account. But if you want to make a multiplayer platforming backend, it needs to be extremely performant. So you need to worry about memory allocation and a good UDP stack. It's complicated. I'd say spend a lot of time optimizing that and figuring it out. It's definitely not a thing I would build unless you've built a 2D platformer game that already has kind of all of that functionality already there, though, first. Let's see. What do we got now? Procedural generation in games. What do you think about it? That's a good question. I used to think it was really, really, really cool. And then I stopped thinking it after I procedurally generated a lot of stuff. What I found was that it's cool to create a lot of things, but the things generally don't tend to be very interesting or exciting. And we could have like an unlimited, endless world, but that's like if I go around like out far enough that way, there's like an unending desert. But it's just boring crap. Like, there's nothing exciting about it. It doesn't mean that you can't have cool, fun procedural stuff. It's just that most of the time, I don't find it to be anywhere near as good as nice handcrafted stuff. And unless you really need a ton of stuff, which most of the time we don't, I'd rather spend the effort and the time building something really good and handcrafted and quality than trying to build a procedural generation system. And this is really just because I've done it before. And I'm like, okay, I built out like, oh, here's this really cool level generator. We get a different level every time and it's really cool. And yeah, but it's not fun enough that anybody cares. So it's not interesting enough. Like when you randomly do things, you miss the little bit of subtlety and the little bit of coolness that you can do when you're handcrafting things. And you lose a lot of the power of having a good game designer on it. In fact, like I feel like that was one of the biggest mistakes I made on one of my buddy Salim's games. We're making this Ghostbusters thing, and we set it up to procedurally generate the levels, thinking like, okay, cool, they'll be able to go in and do the same thing, like new levels all the time. But it's just so similar that it's just not exciting. And I feel like if he had just been able to handcraft the levels, it'd been dramatically better, and people would have loved it a lot more. Yeah, that was a bad one. We should redo that sometime, Salim. Okay, let's see. What do we got here? What are the limitations of Unity? What it can't do, or where does it lack? Can't make breakfast. It can't give you a massage. I don't know. Like, as a game engine, it's pretty damn strong. Like, I don't know that there's really anything that you can't do in it, or that there's no reason that I would recommend any other engine, I guess, that I can think of. I can't come up with anything that says like, hey, I would use this other engine in this specific scenario because X. Like, there's just nothing. Unless you really hate C# and want to use C++, or you really want to use visual scripting, maybe go to Unreal. But even then, I'd still just stick with Unity. I can't see a reason not to. What's the videos for designing an architecture you suggested? Do you have a video in your channel? So I'd say check out, I have a series of solid principle videos. It's on the page there. It's one of the top playlists because I think it's important. That covers some of it, but I'd also look at design pattern videos. I really like the Pluralsight design pattern library one. It's 0% game development related, but it's really good C# stuff. Or the game programming patterns. I did a little playlist on those too, but there's also a full book that's free available on his site, and you can buy the book. If you like it, go grab the book on Amazon and support the dude, because he did a really good book on it and kind of explains some more architectural and design pattern-y type stuff in there that really helps with that. Let's see. I've been looking for examples of advanced UIs and Unity tutorials and creating them. All I see are menu type UIs and tutorials. That's a good point. There really don't tend to be many UI heavy games that are put out there, or at least tutorials that I've seen. So I wonder if we can do like a cool card game one. One thing I would mention when you're building these UI type games is that usually that UI, in fact, in like a Hearthstone thing, it's going to be the case, but it's like the gameplay UI that you have there is going to be its own scene. So I don't know how it is in Hearthstone, but I would guess that the actual like card playing gameplay thing is its own scene. The background part is probably its own scene, that, the thing that you can kind of click on to do all the interactive stuff. Those are probably all separate scenes, and then we load them additively and asynchronously. So you'd build up the entire flow in that one scene. So maybe like all of the gameplay logic, it's all kind of encapsulated in that scene. And I would guess you may even be able to just load that scene and play just that version of it with no background and no menus and stuff. But that doesn't really help on how you would build that all together. But try to put it into a scene, not so much into like a big prefab or a game object with a hierarchy. Make a UI scene that has all of that stuff for you and has maybe multiple canvases at the root level. So are there special steps you take to iterate faster when working on online multiplayer titles? Unit testing. Required to build a client for every change, or using two editors? Exactly. So using two editors, obviously. So I'll use symlinks to be able to use two editors if I need to be able to pull up, two clients and a server. So it really would be like three editors. So I'll have 3 folders with symbolic links. You just use a symlink app. I used to use UEcho, but they killed it. So I use that to load them up if I need to go in and debug and stuff. And that's usually like kind of a last resort because it's extremely slow. It's a very slow process. Unit testing, though, is an extremely fast process. If I want to test my changes, I can write a unit test around them, assuming that the code is right for it. I can write, the code is set up in a way that's testable. I can write a test for it. I can run that, and I can do it in, a 20th, a 10th to a 20th of the amount of time that it takes me to spin up a server, connect, log in, run around, and try something. It's just dramatically faster, and I can do it every single time I make a change because I can run all my unit tests in like a second. So if you're building something big like that, unit tests for sure. It'll save you so much time, so much hassle, make it way easier to test and way, way, way faster. Yes. So somebody said that C# is going to be the only language going forward. Yeah, that's definitely true. So if you've used Unity and you're looking at like the JavaScripty thing that they used to have, or Boo for some reason. They're both pretty much dead. It's all C#. And that's a good thing. You really want one language. You don't want a bunch of languages because then it's just more crap to support and more ways to confuse things. Visual Studio alternative suggestion was requested. People replied with Rider. If you can't afford Rider, I understand. Visual Studio Code is also relatively highly recommended and free. I don't use it just because I really love Rider, but I have friends that use Code because they don't like to pay for Rider. So I would go with that if Visual Studio is a problem. And Visual Studio Code, it's a separate tool, separate app. I don't know how well the debugging experience is in there. It may be great. Like I said, I haven't really used it. Let's see. Do you know any cases when enterprise companies use Unity not for game development for something else like engineering? Yes, tons. In fact, I would say that most of the contracting opportunities that I see appear are not in game development. They're in exactly these kinds of things. They're enterprise applications where people want to use Unity so that they can visualize things, either augmented reality or virtual reality, or just really detailed 3D visualizations of stuff. Or they want to have cool interactive displays like that. One of my buddies does a lot of things for museums. So like everything from kids museums where birds fly on, you tap on them, they go do whatever, and they teach you a little bit of stuff. There's a lot of that, a lot of the enterprise stuff, and it's very, very common. I don't know what percentage of Unity development it is, but it's definitely, it feels like a very non-trivial percent. I would say and I've seen a lot of people just bring Unity into their enterprises too. I met a guy who's doing home, like real estate stuff, brought Unity into it for some things that they wanted to visualize. People doing, there's just a lot. There's a ton of things. I want to list them off, but I'm afraid I'm going to break an NDA or something if I start blabbing too much. But there are a lot of apps and things that I've seen people build with Unity. And to be honest, there's a lot of money there too. The contracts for non-game stuff tend to be really well paying, relatively straightforward because it's not a game. They're not trying to figure out the fun. They're trying to solve a problem. So it's very straightforward on what it is you're going to build, and it usually pays really well, and there's not very much problem or not much hassle. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's definitely a good way to go. Definitely a good way to look for contracting too. If you're starting out and you just want to get a little bit of contracting, look for some of those business and enterprise opportunities. There are a lot out there. Let's see. Using it to build a database, loading scriptable objects. So it says, can you address scriptable objects? I'm using it to build the database and loading scriptable objects into a dictionary, thinking of storing them remote, being able to balance the game without addressables. Just reading that, I don't know. There's a lot of chat after that, but you should definitely, I actually just released a video on addressables too. I would say use them for this. I probably need to read a little bit more and get more context, but it sounds like the right kind of thing. So if you want to be able to store them remotely, especially, and pull them down and load and manage what's there and what's unloaded, that's the way to go. Jason does not get to your machine learning question. Oh, I missed the machine learning question. I'm actually going to do a new video on machine learning pretty soon. The things changed so much that all my old videos kind of are outdated and don't make sense for machine learning. So I want to do a new one. I don't know. I'll try to do it this month, get it out there and see what the scenario is like. And what I'd like to do is show how to build a bot that just plays your game. So you can set up a game and have a bot go through and play the entire thing. Maybe a puzzle game or a platformer or something. But I want to get up a scenario where I show how to do that, like from no machine learning installed at all to installed, and you have a little game that the bot plays. Because I think that's one of the coolest things that you can do with it, right? Is set up AI bots that actually play and are competitive without having to hard code everything and kind of tweak it all. Like that'd be really neat to have a bot that can just play my game. Let's see. What else do we have for questions? Somebody mentioned that CryEngine seems more stable on data-oriented stuff. That may be true. I really don't. I know a couple guys who were using CryEngine. I don't even think they're using it anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Like I liked it back in the day, but if you're looking to build a game and you're not sure what engine to use and you don't have a very specific reason, I'd definitely go with Unity. If you have a specific reason for a certain engine, then you may have that, but in general, I'd say go with Unity. Question: what do you think about making WebGL games, making money from ads? That's a good question. I don't know how much money the ads make. I know I've had friends who did that, and they were able to pull in a couple thousand a month from semi-popular WebGL games, but they're kind of at the at the will of the advertisers and the hosters. So I don't know how well that works now. I know that he kind of killed that game and took it down, the guy I'm thinking of. But I also know that Rocco over at Simmer.io is working on very similar systems, so you can publish your games and get paid for them. So you can go post them up there for free, have people play them, and get paid. So if you're interested in it, I think it's could be cool. I just don't know that like it's enough money that you could support yourself too much. Well, maybe. And it's also one of those things where if you just have a lot of little revenue sources or a lot of games like on Congregate or whatever else, that'd be good. But I wouldn't try to put like everything into one specific app and hope that you're going to live off that app from ad revenue. I'm going to try to keep up with the questions, by the way, and just read them as they come through. What do I do if I stuck on beginner and intermediate level, don't know what to do next? Is it... it scrolled by. Why does it do that? Is it enough for my game so I never learn anything new? This is why I say just build a lot of different games. Don't build the same games. When you get stuck in that beginner level, it's usually because you're doing the same thing over and over. It's a problem that it's funny. I think was it Scott Hanselman or Richard on .NET Rocks would always talk about kind of two types of programming experience. You'd have a programmer that's got 10 years of experience building apps and programs, like 10 years of like doing different things that are constantly learning, doing different apps all the time. Or you can have the programmer who's got 10 years of 1 year of experience. So they're doing the same exact thing for 10 years. They're not really experimenting with anything new. They're not trying new systems. They're just kind of doing minor iterations to one little thing. And that is it's a bad spot to fall into because it gets a lot harder to, like, what happens is you're in that boat for so long that suddenly that opportunity, that thing that you were doing, God, the focus is killing me. The thing that you were doing just kind of becomes unimportant or out of demand, right? Like that app's no longer available or that framework doesn't even exist anymore, right? Like think you're doing, I don't want to call it a Visual Basic, but like VB.net, right? Like if you were building a VB.net app, in the 90s and you stayed with it until the mid 2000s or late 2000s, you had a really hard time converting because those skills, if you weren't working on new skills, don't transition. And the same is true with game engines. If you're still building your game in Unity 4 and you want to get a new Unity job suddenly and you haven't used anything past Unity 4, it's going to be a lot harder. So you want to just constantly build new things and try different projects. That's why I say lots of different projects, because if you stay on one project, you get stuck doing the same thing. Okay, I skipped somebody's question 3 times now. Sorry, let me read it. I was asking about how to know your worth as a game dev when salaries differ so much in different parts of the world. Oh, that's a very good question. And sorry, if I'm missing questions, it's just, God, it scrolls by too fast. I got to get better at this. I need like a new system for managing it. Just never had this many questions come in. So, how to know your worth as a game dev? That is a hard question. And it depends, I guess, on your experience. Let me take a drink real quick. I'm getting thirsty talking so fast. There, you guys saw me almost choke to death and die. Thanks, Rockstar. So, that's kind of a tough one, and it depends, I guess, like you said, a lot on the part of the world. In the United States, It varies a lot too. Like I'm thinking back to when I first started my first game programming job. I would have gone in at just about anything, right? Like I didn't really care what the salary was as long as it was enough to pay a rent and buy food, right? Like I was just so excited about it. Um, Luckily, the manager Ryan who hired me knew I was stupid and said, "Here's more money. Like, here, let me give you this amount." So ended up, I think I started at like 50 or 55,000 um, on that project. But then if we, I look at some of my other friends who did the exact same job or harder jobs and got hired in, like what happened was they'd get hired in through other jobs. They'd get hired in either through QA or through design or something at dramatically lower rates. Like game designers would come in at like 24,000. They would come in basically like near minimum wage, and then they'd get bumped up. Like my buddy Adam, who's really badass programmer. I think he ended up starting out at like 32,000 programming for no reason other than he just didn't know to ask for more or that he really deserved more. And obviously, once that came to everybody's attention and we started talking about like, wait a minute, that's not right. Like, we start talking to the managers and stuff. Eventually, it got fixed. I think relatively quick, but it's very easy to get underpaid, I guess. And what I would do in that scenario, depending on where you are, is just go start talking to people, start talking to other developers, and just get an idea and be honest with them. Just be like, look, I I'm not asking this because like I just want to know how much money you make, and I'm some weird nosy dude that just wants to ask you a bunch of questions and rob you or something. Like just say, hey, like I'm looking at getting into game development in this area. And again, I'm saying like do this at a local meetup and talk to people and just get an idea of what the opportunities are and what those pay ranges are. Because I think that no matter where you are, you're gonna see like 100% difference. You could get paid 50,000 or 100,000, just depending on what company you work at and what the specific job is. Or it may not be exactly 100% difference, but you're gonna see a big variety just based on the company. And a lot of that is based on how much money they have, how much pressure they have to be profitable, whether or not they're very profitable. Very profitable companies tend to pay more. I mean, that's why Silicon Valley companies pay a lot. They make a ton of money, right? But it also affects or kind of ties in with the cost of living in the area. So yeah, and that there's also a game dev salary survey. I forget the site. You can actually look and you can see all of the salaries for. There's the look at the Stack Overflow programmer salary one. That's probably the best. Super in depth, goes over like just by years, and just assume for game dev it's going to be probably about the same, maybe like 10 to 20% lower depending on the area. Or if you're at the high end, it can be like 10 to 20% higher. To be honest, like as you get more experience and more connections and stuff, you can start to make quite a bit more money. You're not necessarily going to make less money in game development. In fact, like I've always made more money doing game development, except for my first game dev job. Part of the problem is that a lot of people are really, really excited and desperate to get into it, so they're willing to take low paying jobs, and it kind of drives down the average. So you may see dramatically lower average salaries, but I've known plenty of game developers that were making like 200,000 or 300,000 a year on salary at their game job because they're just really good at it. They're very important, and they're adding a ton of value to the company. And especially if you can get into a situation where you've got a super successful company that's got royalties, you can make a killing for a long time. So, it's not always a pay cut, but it is hard. Like just say in different countries, I don't really know what the pay rates are at, but that's also a scenario where I was talking about the enterprise stuff. Look at enterprise applications for game systems too. They're generally easier and they tend to pay better. So if you would make a game, would you give yourself limits how much assets in a game can grow in storage size per day, models, textures? No, but usually we'll set a budget, right? So if we know what the target platform is, which we should, we'll set a budget for how much memory, the actual size of the models. So usually we'll set like a a poly count guideline. And obviously sometimes you're going to break the guideline, but a lot of times you're going to go well under the guideline. So you set like a limit on how many vertexes you should have and how many textures, what size those textures should be. But I wouldn't say I'd do like a daily limit or anything like that on how much it would grow. But one thing I've been trying to focus on a lot lately, and probably haven't talked about it much lately, is not pulling in a bunch of crap that you're not going to use. So a lot of time people just pull in tons of assets, they don't use them, and then they're just bloating a project, making it big and slow and a pain in the ass. So try not to do that at least. Only pull in things that you're actually using, and if you're not using it, get rid of it right away because getting rid of it later is dramatically harder. Game jams are really good at forcing you to try and learn new things. I totally agree. By the way, guys, I think I'm going to end this in probably like 10 minutes. I got to go grab some food and stuff and catch up on a couple other things. But game jams, without a doubt, definitely a good thing to do. And go get in a game jam with other programmers. That's the best thing to do so that you're not just sitting there coding by yourself. Code together and learn from each other. You can pick up a bunch of new things from the other programmers. If you're not doing it, if you're just coding by yourself, you're just kind of guessing and figuring things out under pressure instead of really working with a team. So try to work in a team where you're not the only programmer if you're coding. Let's see. What do you think about making a project in a day from start to finish? I love it. In fact, when I started with VR, one of the first things I did was dedicate a week to doing a game a day. So I did one game a day. I built the game, tested the game, and recorded a video on the game, and a lot of the time released the source code for them. They're up on the site somewhere. There's a 7-day game challenge. I went through and did exactly that just to get really good at it and to stumble through the problems, and also just for very intentional practice. I had plans to build stuff, and I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to build either. So it was kind of experimenting with all of the different aspects of VR to figure out what it is I wanted to build. But I would highly recommend like a game a day type thing is awesome. Just build a game, but don't try to come up with the game on the fly, right? So what I did for that and what I recommend is build a list, like write out a list of like 20 things, 20 possible ideas. Pick the ones that you like the most and do those. Don't necessarily set the day that you're going to do them. Do them in the day that you want to do them. Like if you know which one you want to do first, cool. But if you're not sure, just go, hey, day one, let me pick. I want to do that one and build that game. Definitely. Highly recommend it. It's a great way to practice. Let's see. How do you approach designing progression system and stat-based games with skill trees, specifically in Unity? That is very much, it sounds more like a design question. From a code side, it's relatively simple. I just give a dictionary of things that modify a stat and the amount they modify it by. So it'd be like attribute modifiers or something by the attribute, and then all of the things that modify it in a modified total value, and then keep a running total of it in a way to add and remove it. It's kind of a hard one to explain, though, I think, on a chat. I think I could probably do a cool video that shows a little bit of that, but designing it and coding it are very, very different parts. So I'm not sure if you meant like the code design part of it or just the actual design part, because that part, I usually come up with like a rough idea and then I show it to my game designer friends and make it good instead. So how to save data when we exit the game and replay so we should be at the same level. Ooh, that's not simple, right? It's not too complicated, but you have to build your game around it. There are a couple ways that you can do it. The easiest is just checkpoints, right? So you set up some checkpoints and you do like hey, super chat, thanks. I'll have to read that in just a moment. So you set up I lost my train of thought there. Sorry. Let me see. What was my question? I totally got distracted. Oh, saving data. Sorry. Totally spaced there. Saving data. So what we do is like after you pass the checkpoint, we use the player prefs as the simplest way to do it and say like player prefs dot last checkpoint and we'll set the value to like, it's checkpoint number 3. We pass number 3. And then when we pass number 4, we set it to 4. And then when we reload the game, we just load in that player pref. So you can do like player prefs.get, I think it's get int. And you could get like the most recent checkpoint that they passed, and then just move them to that checkpoint and load them up. Now, if you want to keep track of a bunch of data, you just have to store all of that in those player prefs. So you could serialize it as a JSON string, or you can do like a thing that stores it into a bunch of different prefs. I generally just make like an object and serialize it out. If there's going to be a ton of stuff that I don't really know the structure for, if I know the structure and it's going to be simple, then I'll just set some keys in player prefs or something. If you want to do it like for a game and replay the whole thing, though, then you need to have like more of a command-based system where it's something that's replayable. And that's quite a bit more complicated. You have to kind of plan for that from the beginning. But if you plan from the beginning, it's not too bad. You just really have to start thinking about the command pattern kind of at the start, I think. And there are probably some other good ways to do it too, but that's, I think, what I would go with for that being able to replay the same level at least. You need a questions mod. Yes, that's probably true. How do game developers find out if their game is pirated? That's relatively easily. So if you set up any analytics on your game and you start to look at the analytics and it's calling home into some system and you start to see suddenly you have way more installs in China than you've sold of the game, it's probably pirated. That's exactly what I've seen. And I'm just like, oh yeah. Well, I mean, realistically, most of the time when people pirate a game, they're not going to buy it. So I don't think too much about it. And unless it's a multiplayer game where they're costing me something using a server, I don't care. And in that case, I'd probably set up a different scenario or a different pay structure so that it's not an issue. Let me go to that super chat thing though. Where was that? Oh, thanks for all you do. Oh, you're very welcome. I just scrolled down. It's like pages down. My goodness. Okay, let's see. Do you know about Photon? Yes, I used to use it. Don't use it anymore just because I haven't had a project that I needed it for recently. But it was one of the first network systems I used. It's pretty good. Are you using Git Perforce or some other CVS? Yes. So I use Git for a lot of things. I use Collaborate for really small things that I don't need to share with a lot of people. I use Git for things that are super important to me that I want to keep locally and remotely. And on one of my projects, I use SVN because that's what the source control system in use is. I really like Git. Just there are a lot of things I like about the system, but if you've never used a source control system, it's not the easiest to get started with. There are a lot of concepts that you have to kind of pick up. And I mean, even having used Perforce in the past, switching to Git took me like a year before I felt really, really comfortable with it. Not that you can't get comfortable with it faster, just you got to kind of like get into the fire of it and have to deal with it. But it's easy to struggle with it. So if you've never used source control before, I'd probably like go to Collaborate first, get used to it. When you start to see the problems and you start to struggle when you want to do branching and other things, switch to Git. Or whatever the other one. Perforce is fine, but it's a little pricey once you get over 5 people, or at least it used to be. And SVN's okay too. I used to hate it, but now I don't mind it so much. So yeah, I use them all. I'd say get a little familiar with them all. They all work relatively the same. It's like keeping versions of your stuff locally and somewhere else. Just they all have different words for how they do it and slightly different flows. What do you think of working on many games in parallel and updating them when you learn new things? It's definitely interesting. It's not like a way to definitely get a game done. Obviously, if you want to get a game done and out, then focusing on that is probably the way to go. I work on a couple different projects at a time, but I generally focus heavily on one at a time just because I struggle to get things done if I don't. OOP versus DOD. I mean, generally, to be honest, like most game programming is just OOP. I mean, it's better if it's data oriented and faster a lot of the time, but it's not usually that way. Like if we're just being real about most game code that we read and see, it's going to be a lot more object oriented. And it's just because it's easier when the complexity gets bigger, when it gets harder to manage performance and it gets a little bit more complex, but it gets easier to extend and implement things, at least in my experience with OOP. I may end up changing my mind completely though. Who knows? Right? Like once dots is easy to use and stuff, it may be a complete change. Let's see some more questions. College professor wants him to present work. How can you make it worthwhile presentation as an intermediate student? So don't just show what you did. Show mistakes. Show problems that you ran into, and then the interesting solutions that you found to the problems. I find that that's kind of the best way to present those things. Like when you're showing off a project, be like, here's the thing, and here's this really weird problem that we had, and here's the cool solution that I found and figured out to it. And show those kinds of things, because that's where people really get a lot of value, is figuring out like how to get around the bad problems. Gosh, there's so many more questions. I'll see if I can get through real quick. Trying to find a game dev job. They told me to give a demo project. They want it clean code and flexible, solid enough for that. Yeah, I mean, solid principles. I wouldn't say it's not going to force you to do clean code. It's just ways to write code and have things work and stay clean. It's just tips on how to avoid ending up with that big giant monolithic, like you got your 10,000 line game class and then 30 other small classes that do a little tiny thing, and they all hook back into that one giant monolith. The monolith, it's easy at first, turns into a real maintenance nightmare and a hard thing to deal with later. So that's where solid principles come in. They'll show you how to avoid that. Let's scroll down. How are you doing? I am feeling great. For writing code solid. Have you played Nintendo Switch? I played it a little bit. I haven't got one just because it's too damn distracting. When I get too many new fun games, I get distracted and then I don't record things and create things as much as I'd like. Do you know how I could code Bird AI that would avoid trees on their way to a target destination? I'm not sure exactly. I mean, there are a couple ways you could do it, but I'd like to do that with machine learning AI because I think it'd be interesting. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to wrap this up because I've been going on for like 2 hours and I need to get some food and take a break. But if you guys like this, just drop a comment and let me know, and maybe I'll do another one later on this week, or just turn them into a semi-regular thing and just start answering questions and stuff. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, for coming. Check out the addressables video if you get a chance and you're interested in that kind of stuff. I think it's really cool. It's a really neat system, and I'm going to start using it in a lot of things. And yeah, if you have other questions, shoot me an email. I'll try to answer them either on a live stream or just reply to the email. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.